Can you guys hear me? Oops, sorry. Okay, you made it. Fourth talk after lunch. I'm sleepy, which means you're all very sleepy. Okay, so this one is the worst talk of all the talks. This talk is going to suck the most. So just bear with me. All right. How's everyone feeling? We're almost done. Are you excited? Okay. I saw this shirt. I love it. I was normal 2 kids ago. Some of us 3 kids ago. Some of us 4 kids ago. So raising children as your path to salvation. So if I imagine, again, kind of sticking with the same theme as marriage is the path to salvation, then I have to imagine that kids are the path to salvation as well. Right? And so how do we get there, and how does this work? I saw this quote, I just liked it. Motherhood is about raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you thought you would have. It's about understanding that he is exactly the person he is supposed to be, and that if you're lucky, he just might be the teacher who turns you into the person you are supposed to be. And this is such a good reminder, because if you think about parenting, I have a friend. One time I was telling this story, it was on live feed, and then the person from the other state called me and said, "You were talking about me, weren't you?" I have a friend who loves the Lakers, and of course, who doesn't? Anyone who's reasonable, right, loves the Lakers. المهم, or wants to go to heaven. So he's a huge Lakers fan, all right? And when his son started liking the Lakers too, and started wearing Lakers stuff and rooting for the Lakers and what, he was so happy. He was so proud. He's like, "That's my boy. He's a Lakers fan, a real Lakers fan." And you start to think to yourself, why does he care? Why does he like that? What's he doing? He's raising his son to be what? In his image and his likeness. Correct? And so if you think about us as parents, what are we often doing? When I say, "Don't do this," what am I saying? I wouldn't do this. And when I say, "I'm glad you did this," what are you saying? I would do this. So us as parents, what are we doing? We're actually making the kids in our image and our likeness. They want them to be like us, right? And when you think about when a baby's born, right? Of course, all babies look the same to me, and they look like blobs. But at some point, the parent goes, the mom goes, "He has my eyes." And the dad's like, "He's got my hands." And everyone is so excited to see the image of themselves in the baby. It makes them happy, right? And then they spend the rest of their life perfecting what? The likeness, right? Because it's one thing for my son to look like me, right? That's just the way he looks like me. But I'll tell you, the first time, when my older son, sorry, I gotta do this. Now I'm no longer a rock star. Okay. There we go. The first time someone said something, and then I thought of a joke, which I do sometimes, and then my son said the joke, and I was like, "Yeah, that's my boy," right? And I had succeeded in making him like me, to think like me, to approach a problem like me. And someone says something that's not a very good idea, and I think to myself, "That's not a good idea." And then I find him saying why it's not a good idea, and it's the exact same thing I'm thinking. And I'm like, yes, now I've raised him to be like me, right? And so this is what we move towards. And we have to be careful, because you ain't everything. You ain't the best out there. There's better than you. And so we have to make that small detachment and say, do I want to raise him like me, or do I want to raise him to be like the image and likeness of my Father, right? And so what I like about this is raising and celebrating the child you have, not the child you want. Because sometimes we don't get the child we want, right? And what upsets us about that is our ego, right? Because I want him to do what I want. What happens if that kid turned out to be a Celtics fan, God forbid, right? What's that, God forbid, what's that dad going to do? He's going to have a heart attack, right? And, and so we have to be careful that we check ourselves as parents, that we aren't so focused on our own self, right? And I kind of mentioned this earlier, right? When my kid goes to college and gets to a good school and is the star of the football team or the star of the baseball team, that it isn't so much, oh, I'm so, happy my son is, it's more like my son is the star of the football team. And there's a little bit of parental flexing that I know I did, right? When your kid does really well or does something. And we have to check our own ego, because our ego gets us into trouble, right? Because when our ego or our fear make decisions, we make bad decisions, right? When we think about things like, Ines hayulu that's very, very dangerous. That's a horrible thought, right? And it's one we fall into a lot. There's a meeting at a church up in LA, and they have a lot of meetings for the kids, like hymns and whatever, Bible study, blah, blah. And then Abuna, out of the niceness of his heart, does a meeting for the adults at the same time. So the adults the meeting for the kids has 50 kids. Abuna does the meeting for the adults. How many? 4. Where'd everybody go? They're at Starbucks. Ask the parents, why aren't you there? He's like, look, I come for the kids. How many people say this? I want to bring my kids to the church for the kids. I come for the kids. I want to be a good example. I want to show them, that, we're here for the kids. What do you think? It's a horrible reason to come to church, right? Because it's fake. Do you think your kids can spot fake? Yeah. Could you spot fake? Yeah. Can everyone in this in this church remember this hall, remember someone as they were growing up, some uncle or aunt who was fake at church and who said, oh, Habibi, and love, and Misharifi, but they're fake and they're full of hatred? Does anyone know one like that? Yeah, all of us do. And we could spot it a mile away. And guess what? The kids can spot it in you too. So if you're going to I'm just going to come and the kids, but then I'm going to go to Starbucks. Well, guess where your kid's going to go when he's 18? He's going to go to Starbucks, just like dad and mom did, right? And so this whole thing of I come for the kids, don't come for the kids. Come for yourself. Get yourself right first. I say this to the servants at our church all the time. The Sunday school teachers. If you get into this mode of, I should be at the liturgy early so that my kids can see me at the liturgy early and then they can know, no. Stop. Don't lie. Don't fake it. Don't come to the liturgy early because you want some kid to see you. You come for you. You come because you need it. And if you don't get that you need it, then something's wrong. Fix it. And then come early. And if the kid sees you or doesn't see you, no one cares. You come for you. And so that's kind of the basis on which I'm sort of approaching how we parent. So what do we want for our kids? Well, we want them to stay off drugs. We don't want them to marry the wrong person. We don't want them to get involved in the wrong crowd. We want them to have a successful career, right? These are all the things we want. Is that why we bring them to church? So they stay off drugs, and they marry the right person, and they become doctors and have a Mercedes? Is that the right motivation for the spiritual life? Is that why we bring them? Some people bring kids for that reason. I want them to mix with the right crowd. I want them to have a good start. Don't we ultimately want to see them in heaven? And why do I want to see my kids in heaven? Because I want to be with them. I want to be with them in heaven, and I want them to have God in their life. And so sometimes we get a little mixed up with church, and we think, I'm just going to bring them so they become good, and they don't mess up, and they don't, follow the ways of the world. But that's not the reason. That's the worldly reason. That's the kingdom. That's, I want them to get a good job. And then, some churches, I don't know, kind of go a little bit, and they're like, we're going to have prep classes for you guys, and we're going to help you get into college, and we'll have essay writing, and that's the world. And that's great. I guess it's a service, right? But that's not what the church is there for, and that's not why we come. So how do we do this? Oops, there goes the rest of the slides. All right, I know how to do this. Hang on, I'm really good now, Boona. Yeah, and I just want you to know that I can do it too. عشان تعرف بس مش أي كلام. No, don't fire him. He's doing a great job. Oh, John's in the back. Is that you, John? Yeah, there you go. Okay, I know what you're thinking. I talked too soon. Spoke too soon. Now I'll remirror again. Allah. See, this is what happens when I tell Abuna to sit down. All right, Abuna. I don't know.
Sell it?
Oh, I was hitting. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So. I'll let you know if I see
Takes
it.
a second to...
There it is. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
All right.
There you go. I'll just,
There it is. There we go. Allah. Okay. So how do we get our kids to heaven? We've all agreed this is the goal, right? And that's the rest of today's talk. My goal is not to get invited back. So I'm going to say some things that none of you will like. And that's why the talk is, it's not you, it's me. So it's not about the kids, it's about you. It's not about what you're going to say to the kids, it's about you. And hil adabi shway. So why does God include us in the process of creation? Of course, the love we have for our kids is flawed love. It's broken love. But we see how much God loves us. I remember when I first had my first kid. I actually don't like kids, by the way. Like little kids. They drive me crazy. And I didn't used to. And then I had my first one. And, you know, there's a thing. When the first time your little kid wraps his whole hand around your finger, right? You're gone, right? You're hooked at that point. And I remember having the thought, there is nothing on earth I love as much as this kid. You know, and you know as parents, right, that if anything tries to harm your child, you know, an animal attacks you, you're going to throw yourself in front of that child. No, you won't even think twice about it, right? And I thought to myself, does God love me nearly as much as I love this kid? Is that even possible? Right? That God can love me like that. And then I realized this is how God's teaching me about himself. He's like, I'm going to let you know how I feel about you. Just like you created this child, I'm going to let you share in the process of creation so you get what I feel for you. And then it just blows your mind. And then you realize, as much as love as I have for that kid, it's still imperfect, and it's still egotistical, and it's still about me, and it's still about my image in the community, and all the garbage that I have, but still how much I love that kid is how much he loves me. And so God reveals himself to us by letting us be parents. He's teaching us who he is through this process. Like, why be so involved? Why let us do this? Why let us create with him? And so can we reveal God to our kids through parenting? Yeah. So just like God reveals himself to me through my kids, I'm going to reveal God to my kids through me. And we have to think and be very conscientious about this all the time. There are many times when my child will say something or do something, and I will think to myself and have the active thought, I have to reflect God now. What would God say? And the easiest example for me to think, and I was telling a few people this, is I think of the story of the prodigal son. And I say, what would that dad do in this moment? That's what I have to do. And a lot of times parenting is confusing. It's hard. There's no right answer. You don't know what the right answer is. You and your spouse are fighting over the right answer. You're mixed up because you know what your dad did and your mom did and your uncle did, but you don't know what the right thing is. I like to go back to that. What would the father in the parable of the prodigal son do right now? And that's usually the right answer. And usually it's throw your arms around him and say, I love you. And so we reveal to our kids God. So how do we handle the things that our kids are seeing in school and the negative things that are coming at them? First thing is, we have to be very calm and listen. This is not good for Egyptians. We have to be calm. Very, very, very calm. In everything, no matter what they say to us, you have to react in a way that allows them to want to come back to you. Because when you react in an angry voice, first of all, you're not reflecting God. And second of all, they're not going to tell you again, right? If you go, "Why?" Right? And then they're okay, I'm not going to talk to mom. And to this day, there are things I tell my son, Justin, I say, don't tell Teta. If you have any brains, you don't tell Teta, right? My son went to, on a trip with some of his friends, and I said, if you tell her, you're a fool, because she's going to go off, and right, because of the way she reacts. And so she's cut off that part of communication. Don't be like that, right? Don't allow your own emotion. No matter what they say, you respond and say, oh, okay. What makes you say that? And then you're engaging, and you let them continue to speak. If you stun them with anger, they go into a shock mode, and they cut you out. You validate their feelings. St. John Chrysostom says, no matter how just your words are, or how just your words may be, you ruin everything when you speak in anger. Right? I can't tell you how many times my kids will say things like, well, he was just angry. Or they'll remember me and they'll say, oh, you were just super angry. And I'll say, well, what was I angry about? The important thing. And they're like, oh, I don't know. You were just angry. Okay? Now, I could shake my fist and say, well, that's because you weren't listening, and I had a good point, and you messed up, and I told you messed up. I could do all that stuff. But in the end, what does my daughter remember? What does my son remember? You were just angry. That's it. Because they do. They go into a psychological protection mode, and they just kind of shut down when you're screaming. And so we can always point out the positives. I want to tell you the story of St Siloan, the Athonite, as I continue down my Greek storyline here. So St Siloan, this is him. I'll just tell you the story. He was born of several, it was a family of peasants. He was farmers, lots of kids in the house. And St. Siloan was in charge of cooking dinner. A different kid was in charge of cooking dinner every night. And it was a Wednesday or a Friday, I forget. It was fasting day. And St. Siloan was in charge, he was a young boy, in charge of cooking dinner that night. So he cooked dinner, and he cooked fatari food. He cooked non-fasting food, although it was fasting time. So his dad comes home from the field, sees that his son didn't cook Siami food. What was his reaction? Nothing. And then 6 months later, 6 months, he goes to St. Siloan, he goes, do you remember back in May when I asked you to cook, it was your turn to cook, it was a Wednesday, and you cooked fatari food. Do you remember that? And he goes, oh yeah, I did. And St. Siloan still remembers it to this day, that his dad waited 6 months before he corrected him, before he told him. What was his dad? He was patient. He was loving. He waited for the right time. Now, maybe 6 months is a little long. I would have waited 6 minutes or 6 seconds, barely. But I want you to see the spirit. And St. Siloan, in his memoirs, decades later, writes about this story. My dad waited 6 months to correct me. And what he's showing you is the loving heart of the Father. And what the Father was showing was the loving heart of God. Because God waits for us like that. God waits to correct us. God is patient with us. Very, very, very patient with us. And he lets us fall week in, week out, year in, year out, decade in, decade out, before he corrects. And so the Father was modeling the Father. And in telling of these events, so then St. Siloan said, why didn't you tell me? And he said, I didn't want to embarrass you. Which is not the heart of any Egyptian father, right? Hazak qudam nas, right? Which is, the mode of operation that we all follow by. The more nas, the better. And the more of your young friends around you, the better. Lashin ashabak yishuf tahmar, right? But again, this is very different from what we were raised in, right? And we have to be very aware that this culture, this society, your kids are different and come in a different culture. They need that kind of love and that kind of sensitivity and that kind of caring. In telling about these events from the life of his father's house, the elder would add, "This is the type of elder one should be. He never became angry, always had an even and meek disposition. Think about it. He waited half a year for a good moment to tell me without shaming me." He remembered it, that he wouldn't shame me. This is what our kids remember, by the way. And you can all remember a time when you were little, when your parents embarrassed you in front of your friends. And you will never forget it. And you will never forgive them for it, because it is unnecessary. And it is unnecessary. And that is not how God does with us. Abuna Tedros Malati, when he thinks about the Lord's Prayer, the prayer of thanksgiving, he says there's this one part where he says, we thank you for covering us, right? And that's what God does. He covers us. And you can also remember a moment when you were being attacked by somebody, or someone was, going after you or shaming you or making fun of you, and someone stood up for you. Think of that moment when you're little, when someone said, hey, leave him alone. He's all right. He's with me, or she's with me, or stop picking on her. You can still remember that moment because someone protected you. Those moments in our children's lives are never forgotten. I mean, just like the other day, one of my sons did something stupid, and I don't know how much to share here, but all of it? انت مشاكل على فكرة. Every time I ask a question, he always gives the answer I don't want to hear. It's happened 4 times now. Not that I'm counting, but yeah, it's not Mark. Meshi. No, I figured you 2 out now. What am I talking about? Oh, so he basically, he started talking about something. He started sharing something that he shouldn't have shared. He knew a secret about someone, and he shared it with someone else. And that someone else found out. And next thing you know, I get a text. So I immediately kind of go into a mode of protection, right? And I correspond with him, I correspond with her, and we figured it out. And the whole time, all I could do was compliment and protect him over and over again. And then he sent me this incredible text of thanking me for how I handled it and how I didn't judge him and attack him and condemn him. And you say, see, this is what happens. I've told you a million times. You don't do this, blah, 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 blah. Although he knew I said those things to him. And he remembered that I said those things to him. But I didn't say them. And that meant a lot to him, that I didn't say them, that I just protected. And when he would say, thanks for, I'm like, don't worry about it. It's over. And those moments our kids remember because they touch what? They touch God, right? That's how they feel God. The reason they remember them, the reason they resonate with them, the reason 20, 30, 40 years later he's going to tell this story in his memoir is because that's when he touched who God was through his dad or through his mom. Those are the moments. And so the more of those moments we give our kids, the better. I had a young girl come, she's not young, she's 26. And she's like, I'm done with church, I'm atheist, I'm over it, I'm gone, blah, blah. Hey, Habibti, what's happening? Church is so judgmental. Church is this, church is that, church is the people are saying this. Everyone, she has a gay friend. She doesn't, her dad's like, I don't want you to tell anyone you have a gay friend. You're 26, you're not married, they're going to think you're gay. What are people going to say? No one's going to want to marry you. And she's like, the church is this, and the church is judgmental, and the church is coming to conclusions. And I said, Habibti, I don't think the church is doing any of those things. I think it's your dad. It sounds like your problem isn't with Jesus, it's with your dad. And your dad, and you're projecting your dad onto the church. And it took her a second, and she's actually getting a PhD in psychology, and she goes, that's exactly what I'm doing, right? And so everything negative her dad was doing, she was replacing with the word, the church, right? And so I'm not putting this to put pressure on you, right? And we'll talk about, how we handle this in a second, right? But you have to be aware that when I protrude hatred, right? We saw this during the protests, the Black Lives Matter, and all of these things. There were parents who were racists, who were saying, "Issu dol, واللي مش عارف إيه, ربنا يولع فيهم," right? And all these other things, okay? The kids were reacting like, "You're a racist, you're a bigot." And then you know what they'd say? "The church is racist, the church is bigoted." Obba, right? What happened? No, mom and dad are, but the church, Jesus isn't. So very carefully, the kids look at us and they say, "See, that's what the church is." And we have to be very careful. As parents, I have to mirror God. Think, how would God react, right, to different things? So I'm going to read you some quotes from this guy, Elder Porphyrios. He's amazing. He was canonized in 2013, but he's Eastern Orthodox, so he's not Coptic, so he's not a real saint. Just going to let that one hang in the air. He was a monk of Mount Athos, and he's super cutie. Come in. So anytime you have a super cutie, you got to know he's the real deal, right? Super cute. He actually was the pastor of the chapel, whatever, at this clinic in Athens, and I actually went to the clinic when I was in Athens a few years ago. And he's just an amazing. Anyway, he wrote this book called Wounded by Love. Anyone read this book? If you haven't read this book, you have to read this book. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Bible, maybe a few others, Wounded by Love. It's just amazing. Anyway. So, and I sort of brought this up about as your kids get older, right? Teenagers, after a decade or so of struggling, and you take them to soccer and football and basketball and everything else, you make sacrifices, you pour out your love without hesitation. Your teen looks at you and says, "I will not reciprocate your love." And that one hurts, right? Some of us have started to feel that, right? When the teen looks back at you and just says, "You're an idiot," or whatever, "I don't care, I don't love you, shut up." We get this at home, right? All of us do. I mean, I don't because my kids are perfect, but your kids. And our first reaction, of course, is anger, sadness, guilt, maybe feeling like I did something wrong as a parent. What did I do wrong? And that's okay. That's the human reaction at the emotional level, and that's a normal reaction. But I want to push you to the second reaction. What should the second reaction be? If really kids are there to bring me to God, then what should my second, other than Inte ibn Sittin and you don't appreciate after all I did for you, the next reaction should be what? Is this what I do to God? The story of the prodigal son? Shouldn't that be our next reaction? Like, is this what God feels when I sin? Is this what God feels when I reject Him? Is this what God feels when He gives me love and I do begezma, which I do? And so if children are bringing me closer to God, and that's the point, then my first reaction, sure, human being, and my kids, and مش متربي, وأنا أبويا كان ديك ألمين, and all this stuff, right? But then I have to think, isn't that what I do? And so what I want to do is I want to push you toward that kind of process, right? He says, what saves and makes for good children is the life of the parents in the home. You're not going to like any of these quotes, just letting you know. The parents need to devote themselves to the love of God. They need to become saints in their relation to their children through their mildness, patience, and love. They need to make a new start every day with a fresh outlook, renewed enthusiasm, and love for their children. And the joy that will come to them, the holiness that will visit them, will shower grace on their children. So how do I get good kids? I need to become a saint. I need to focus on my own life. When Abuna runs the Bible study, I don't go to Starbucks. I go to the Bible study. Generally, you're really not going to like this, the parents are to blame for the bad behavior of their children. And their behavior is not improved by reprimand, disciplining, or strictness. If the parents do not pursue a life of holiness And if they don't engage in spiritual struggle, they make great mistakes and transmit the faults they have within them. I like this. It's not improved by reprimand, disciplining, or strictness. Sometimes we just get a little bit carried away. It's amazing what love does. Love melts. And when you think about, St. Macarius talks about a piece of steel. And he says when you want to bend a piece of steel, right, you can hit it with a hammer. You can hit it with a hammer as much as you want, but you're not going to bend it. How are you going to bend it? You got to melt it. First, you got to melt it. And how do you melt it? The love of God melts it. God melts it. Then it's melted, and then you can move it. The children become malleable when they're melted. Right? The harder you are on them, and the more rigid, and the less affection you show them, the more rigid they become. And then you just hit them with a hammer, harder and harder and harder, and it doesn't work. I mean, many of you have taught Sunday school. You know the one kid who's got the loudest and the most problems and acting up in class the most time. What does he need? Does he need gezma? He needs a hug. He needs you to take him out to ice cream. He needs you to show him a lot of affection. He needs you to go play baseball with him. That's what he needs. He doesn't need you to kick him out of the class and say, I'm going to tell your parents, Inta mish Rabbi. That's not what he needs, right? Because he doesn't have that at home. Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth. Our words are far less effective than we think they are. In fact, they're just kind of blah, blah, blah. Do you guys remember when your mom and dad used to talk a lot and you could ignore them? And they say, what did I just say? And you're like, huh? And then you can remember the last few words. Husbands do this very well with their wives. Right? So it's actually a gift from God to keep us married. All the men are laughing. The women are like, this is not funny at all. Don't love with words or your tongue. Love with your actions and your deeds. Continuing. A large part of the responsibility for a person's spiritual state lies with the family. For children to be released from their various inner problems, it is not enough for them to receive good advice or to be compelled by force, nor do logical arguments or threats do any good. These things rather make matters worse. The solution is to be found through the sanctification of the parents. Become saints and you will have no problems with your children. The sanctity of their parents releases the children from their problems. Again, focus on the self. Become the saints that you want your children to become. I always tell the youth, that they're going to turn out just like their parents. And they all like, not my dad. My dad's an idiot, right? So my kids say all the time, right? But it's the truth. And I'm sure many of you now are starting to do this, right? Where you say something and you go, oh my God, that's exactly what my mom used to say. That's exactly what my dad used to say. Oh my God, if I ever become like that, you have to shoot me, okay? Well, guess what happens? That's the way it works, right? And so if that's true with you, then it's true with your kids. So they're going to become like you. All of you. Right? And if you're like, hey, let's ilbish shemes because I want people to see us. Okay, at least ilbish shemes in Naeed because that's very important because that's when everyone else is there. And then try to get the microphone because, that's the time when you lead and you're very good with the hymns and blah, blah. If that's who you are as a parent, guess what kind of kid you're going to have? One who's really attached to Christ and wants to serve with all his heart and doesn't care what people think? No, he's going to be the one who wants to show. He's going to be like you. And you're going to transmit your things to them. So if you don't want to transmit your things to them, don't have things. Work on the things. Or better, let them know you're working on the things. Because sometimes we get in our head that, this is obviously very cultural, that I have to be perfect, that I have to be the parent, that I can't apologize to my kid for losing my temper the other day, or I made a mistake, or, you know what, I shouldn't have looked on your phone, I'm sorry, I broke your confidence. Sometimes we think we can't apologize or we shouldn't apologize. That's not true. In fact, You want to teach your kid how to apologize? Apologize. Right? And some parents will come to me and say, my kid never says he's sorry. And of course, like a jerk, I say, do you? No. I'm the parent. طيب. اشرب. Right? I mean, you did it. You're insisting. You taught them, I don't apologize. All right? Your kid won't either. You want to teach them something? Model the behavior. Say, I'm sorry. Serve. You know, when your kid finishes, go pick up their cup and wash it. And you're thinking, no, I'm teaching them to be lazy. I'm teaching them not. No, you're teaching them to serve others. And guess what's going to happen next week when you're done with your dishes? What's your kid going to do? He's going to walk over one day and pick it up. I'll wash it, Dad, and wash it for you. Because he saw you do it. And he saw it do it in humility. And he knows you're the dad. And when my dad was, blah, 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 I used to take his shoes off when he came home from work. And do it. Be that. Be the model that you want your kids to see. In this environment, in the United States in particular, the kids are yearning for transparency and they're yearning for authenticity. That's what the kids want. They don't want you to say fake things. They don't want fake people. They want real. Be real. Real with your mistakes and real with what's good and with what's bad. And serve and love and care in all the ways you want them to serve and love and care for you. And it's shocking. Every time one of my kids does something that I do that I don't ever recall telling them to do. Ever. And all of a sudden, I'll see my son do it. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think he noticed. And he just did it. And you realize, this is how it works. Right? It's not about, see, you're going to leave this again? How many times I have to tell you? And nag them. A child needs to be surrounded by people who pray and pray ardently. I love this part. A mother should not be satisfied by giving her child a physical caress, but also should coddle it with the caress of prayer. In the depths of its soul, the child senses the spiritual caress that its mother conveys to it and is drawn to her. It feels security and certainty when its mother mystically embraces it with constant, intense, and fervent prayers and releases it from whatever is oppressing it. This is amazing. This is what's in Orthodoxy that's amazing. It's mysticism. It's mystical. He's saying the kid feels your prayers even though you don't say them. Is that true? Absolutely. And the kid feels the warmth of the mother praying without hearing and without understanding and without comprehending. Right? And this is the mysticism that we have, that we sense. This is why we give kids communion when they don't understand. Right? Because there is something beyond the tangible, what I can sense with my eyes and my ears and my lips. And so don't be satisfied by giving your child physical caress. Give them a spiritual caress. Right? And Baba Shnuda, Pope Shnuda used to say, he had this, these little sayings I used to love. He says, you can tell a woman's cooking when she cooks and she prays. He's like, you can taste it. When she bakes with psalms, the food tastes different. Right? And that's such a beautiful meditation to me. Right? That when you bake with prayers, it tastes different. Right? And again, is this logical, rational on the earthly level? Of course not. Right? But this is the mysticism in which we have, that orthodoxy exists. Right? Just like the relics of the saints. Should the relics of the saints do anything? They're dead bodies. They're dust. And yet God comes and he teaches us, no, I'm going to do a miracle through a dead body, just so you know the body's still holy. He's telling us what he's like. He's explaining it to us. This is a really good quote. All these quotes are really good, I'm sorry. Pray, and when you have to speak. I'll say it again. Pray, and when you have to speak. To your children with love. Lots of prayers and few words. Lots of prayers and few words for everyone. We mustn't become an annoyance, but rather pray secretly and then speak. And God will let us know in our hearts whether the others have accepted what we have said. If not, we won't speak. We will simply pray mystically. But if we speak, we become an annoyance and make others react or even infuriate them. This is why it is better to speak mystically to the heart of others through secret prayer rather than to their ears. Do you believe this? And this is kind of the problem with faith. Do you believe it? Do you believe that I can speak to my child through prayer? I don't know the answer. Some do and some don't. And we can all say we do, but we don't really. When I say things like, well, I want my kid to know that I went to the Wednesday liturgy. Why? Why do you want them to know? Well, so they can see me, so they can learn from my example. Don't you believe they can learn from your example without them knowing? No. Then I'm at the level of the senses. If I don't see it with my eyes, then it doesn't happen. So I'll tell you guys a story, a personal story. So a few, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that, we went to Thanksgiving at my wife's sister's house, and we started playing Risk. You guys know Risk? Anyway, it's a fun game. So my son, I was playing with my sons, and I'm trying to remember exactly how it went. One person's supposed to roll first, offense is supposed to roll first, and then defense is supposed to roll second, or something like that, right? But it's dice, okay? Dice are random, okay? And so the whole time we've been playing for like months, right? I think the offense guy rolled first, and then the defense guy rolled second, and if the offense guy rolled a higher roll than the defense guy, then the offense guy wins, okay? And so my son was on offense, and he rolled. And then my other son was on defense, and then he rolled. And my other son won. Right, so my older son lost. And then he goes, no, you know what? That's not the rules. The rules are supposed to roll the other way. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I'll look it up. And he looks it up, and I'm like, okay, whatever. But we've been playing like this for like 6 months. And we've been playing like this the whole game. And the only reason you're saying that is because you lost. Right? And he's like, no, we're playing by the rules. I refuse to accept it. And he just throws this big hissy fit. Okay? And I was extremely disappointed. I was very mad. I'm like, you're just cheating. And you're just doing this because you lost. And he's not like this. He really isn't. So I got very upset. I walked into the other room. And I just said, God, you teach him. I obviously failed. Right? I raised a cheater. You teach him. So I went back into the room. No joke. I went back into the room. I said, okay, let's play. Let's continue. My other son gets all upset. No, he's just doing that because of blah, blah, blah. That's not fair. I'm like, we're just going to keep playing. He's right. Those are the rules. He's right. And then my son rolls, and they both roll. It's dice, okay? And you know how dice works, right? The son who had just gotten cheated, he starts rolling 6s, okay? Which is the highest. And my other son starts rolling 1s, which is the lowest. And my first son, the cheater son, he rolls 7 1s in a row, which if you do the math is 1 to the 6th to the 1/6 to the 6th. Okay? That's a very, very, very low probability event. And my other son rolls 6 6s in a row. Almost statistically impossible at this point. And I'm just smiling ear to ear. You know? Just like, and so my cheater son gets decimated. He loses his whole army. And he had the army, and the other guy had nothing. And he lost the whole thing. Right? And of course he gets mad, he flips the board, and he walks out. Which is the way all Thanksgiving parties should end. Of course, I'm just smiling ear to ear. I'm just looking up like, okay, انت بتدلعني now. You're just spoiling me. Right? And like it's like when God gives you a piece of candy. Right? And he says, you know what, let me take care of it occasionally. I relinquished my control. I'm not telling the story because I want to talk about myself. For all of us, relinquishing that control is very hard, right? But God does. And when we give it up to God in prayer, he does. And he wants us to test him. So test him. Try it. Let God be in control. More quotes. This is the most perfect way for the mother to speak to God and for God to speak to the children. If you do not communicate in this way, constantly lecturing becomes a kind of intimidation. And when the child grows up, it begins to rebel. That is to take revenge, so to speak, on its father and mother who coerced it. Coercing is a big deal. You would be shocked if you asked your kids, when you thought you asked them a question like, hey, do you want, I don't know, kofta or chicken? Okay? And you thought they said kofta. I'm just giving you a random example because that's what we just ate. And if you go back and you ask your kids about events in their life, and you say, well, you picked kofta. No, I didn't. You made me get it. What? I thought I asked you. No. You pushed me. You pushed me to play football. You pushed me to play soccer. You wanted me to go to hymn class. You pushed me to go to the church. You pushed me to do, and you're like, what? No, I asked you. You did. You agreed to all these things. Kids are extremely sensitive to the feeling of being coerced. Remember, you're 5 times their size and 30 times their age, right? So you're very intimidating. And so when you do something very subtle like, well, you want that, right? To them, they feel forced. Now, that's okay when we're talking about cleaning your room or brushing your teeth or something stupid. But when you start talking about God and God entering my life, I can't coerce that. You can't make your kid do anything, right? And to some of the older parents here, right, you know that control is a figment of your imagination. There is no control, right? You have no control. And if you think you do, you're just in la la land. And God's going to help you with that problem soon enough. So we can't make our kids do anything. I can bring them to hymn class, but I can't make them pray. I can make them serve, but I can't make them love. Right? So I can bring them to church, but I can't make them Christians. So one of the places in the world that coercion just will never and cannot be allowed to exist is in the church, is in religion. That cannot be coerced. That has to 1,010% come from the kid, even to the point where the parent can back off and say, hey, you can go if you want. I don't care. It's your salvation. Not like that. That's guilty. Right? This is between you and God, Habibi. It's not me. Because in this case, that is true. You cannot be forced to do anything. And he says here, it becomes a kind of intimidation, and then the kids rebel against it. Because you kept telling them to do it. Right? And even though you're like, no, I gave you the choice. You always wanted to come to hymn class, every single hymn class on Saturday night, right? No, of course not, I didn't. What are you, crazy? I thought you liked it. No, I don't. I come for you. Because if I don't, you're going to say, are you sure? You sure you want to go there? Well, you better not. Man, I'm going to get a lecture. So I did. This isn't Christian, but he says, what you say speaks so loud that I cannot hear. What you do speaks so loud that I cannot hear what you say. As parents, this is the truest statement I can think of, and that's why I found a non-Christian source, but still put it up. What you do speaks so loud. Right? Kind of like the cleaning. If you want to teach your kid how to say thank you, don't tell them to say thank you. Say thank you. You know, I mean, there's this, again, I don't like to just talk stories about myself, but like one of the things I do whenever I hear a loud sound, whenever my kid drops something or breaks something or does something, my parents used to say to me, عملت إيه? Right? What did you do? And of course, that immediately puts me on the defensive. Even if I didn't do anything wrong, I'm scared that I did something wrong. Or even if I didn't, they're going to figure out a way that, well, you know, what you should have done was this. Right? So I'm very conscious to say, Are you okay? That's the first word out of my mouth every time. Are you okay? And now my kid knows that it's not his fault, right? Is everyone safe? That's all that matters. And I can't tell you how happy I am when something fell on my son's, on my daughter, and my son's first word was, she just dropped, "Are you okay?" I didn't teach him to say that. I didn't tell him to say that. He just heard me say it over and over again. And so be very aware that the words we use in the house are going to be your kids' words, just like your parents' words are now your words. And push yourself to do, not to say. Say less. Say less. Be more and do more. Make that the focus. A lot of times you go to parenting talks and like, well, what do I tell my kids? And they say, okay, here's what you tell your kids. Tell them to do this and then say it like this. And then if you use these words like, oh, I really like that you hit Johnny in the face, but next time you can show, and you can do all this stuff that it's like, it's not about give me the words. It's about be. Let them see you love. Right? And you can destroy all of that when Tanta Susu comes back, right? And you hear your mom or your dad talking on the phone or talking to their friends so negatively. I remember one time someone was over our house and he was talking so negatively about someone else. And I just stopped him. I said, let's not talk about anybody else like that. And then just then I heard a creak. It was at night. And I look and my son was standing there. And I was like, imagine the lesson. Thank God. Imagine if he'd watched me. As St. John Chrysostom says, sometimes we fast during Lent from meat, but we eat the flesh of our brother with our teeth. We don't eat animals, but we eat each other. Imagine if he had watched me eat the flesh of my brother with my words. And then I go and I give a talk on don't judge and don't gossip. Dad's a liar. Dad's a hypocrite. Dad's full of crap. So that lesson was far more. And it wasn't because I was trying to, look around, let me impress him, let me show him the right. It just has to come from inside because you don't know when they're watching you. You don't know what they see. You don't know what they hear about you. It happens all the time. Kids are perceiving so much. Even though you think their nose is in a thing, you'd be amazed. I was at Abuna and Sherry's house yesterday, and their kid was just like, staring at the thing, and we're talking. He's like, I know you're talking about me. Like, he's just totally listening. It's fun. Okay. The life of the children seems to be affected by the radiation of their parents. If the parents insist, come on, now, go and make confession, go and receive communion, and so on, nothing is achieved. But what does your child see in you? How do you live and what do you radiate? Does Christ radiate in you? That is what is transmitted to your child. This is where the secret lies. And if this is done when the child is young, it will not be necessary for it to undergo great travail when it is older. Sorry, it got cut off. Let them see. Don't tell them about confession. Go confess. Go confess. And maybe bring it up and say, I was at confession, and if you feel like you have to, you really don't have to do that. The kids feel it. The kids sense it. Right? So don't teach them about prayer. I don't want to keep telling stories about myself, so I'll stop. Speak more to God about your children than to your children about God. Speak more to God about your children than to your children about God. The soul of a teenager is in a state of explosion of freedom. For this reason, he has a hard time accepting various counsels, doesn't want advice. So rather than counseling him continuously and reproaching him now and again, leave the situation to Christ, to the saints. Ask them to bring him to reason. Talk less, be more. Love more. We inundate our kids. We just pound on them constantly. Advice, or Bina Yazal, or whatever. And some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's wrong. Be less. Okay. What do we pray for? We shouldn't continually continue relentlessly in order to acquire what we want. Rather, we should leave all things to the will of God. What happens when we pursue what we want? These wants always increase, and we are never satisfied with what we have. How many people have started, if you could just get my kid through junior high, if I can just get him through high school, if he can just do a good job on the SAT, if he just gets into college, all I want is for my son to get into college. I just need him to graduate. Oh, he needs to go into medical school. Just if he gets a good residency. He just has to marry a good woman. I just want him to be happy with the kids. I want his kids to be, right? It doesn't end, okay? If we pray for good grades, next we'll ask for, this is what he says. The more we chase after these things, the more elusive they become. If we pray for good grades, next we'll ask for a good job. Then it will be for a better job, and so forth. What should we ask for in our prayer? In our prayer, we should ask only for the salvation of our soul. The secret is to ask for your union with Christ with utter... sorry, I can't see it. No, we can stop there. In our prayer, we should ask only for the salvation of our soul. What about the kids? They'll ask for prayer. They'll ask for salvation of their soul at some point. Focus on the self. Radiate. Every time you say, Lord, have mercy on my child, your child will receive one good thought from Christ. The more you pray, the more good thoughts will be acquired by your child. You shouldn't say to a child, you'll succeed. This one is very important. You shouldn't say to a child, you'll succeed, you're great, you're young, you're fearless, you're perfect. This is not good for the child. You can tell the child to pray and say, the talents you have been given to you by God. Pray and God will give you the strength to cultivate them in a way you will succeed. God will give you his grace. This is the best way. Children should learn to seek God's help in everything. So even in the congratulations, when we tell kids, you did wonderful, you say, thank God. God is good. God loves you. God stood by you. Let them know God was there. Instead, we try to build up the kids' egos. And this is really a problem with today's child-rearing approach. It's all very positive. It's sometimes too positive. And it's positive not in the sense, I'm saying to be very positive, but it's not in the positive in the sense, it's positive in the sense of the person, not of God's relationship with the person. You are amazing, you are perfect, you struggled, you worked hard, you're the best. Versus look what God gave you. Look what God did with you. Look what the two of you achieved together. Right? And we pump these kids up and their egos are through the roof. Right? And then I get them in college and they can't handle anything. The kids now have to be coddled. They can't cope with anything. You can't even, like, I went to a conference once, an academic conference, and they talked about using red pens and how red pens can really hurt kids' feelings. And that you shouldn't grade with red pens because it evokes negative. I'm like, what's wrong with this? The kids can't handle any kind of negativity. So don't go too far extreme on that other side. Okay. They fill them with egotistical words. They do not lead them to the Spirit of God, and they alienate them from the church. When the children grow up a little and go to school with their egotism, they abandon and disdain religion, and they lose their respect for God and their parents and for everyone. And this is what we see. You fill the kids with ego and pride, and you make them think they're the best, and then they hate you. And they hate God, and they hate the church. They become stubborn, hard, and unfeeling with no respect for religion or for God. We have produced a generation of egotists and not of Christians. So again, focus on the self, but when we talk to the kids, love. Love isn't always just praise, egotistical praise. Someone gave me a question. Oh, my slides are cut off. No, it's okay. This one, you think I know how to do that? Oh, there we go. Oh.
It's like their manner.
Okay.
And then just press go under slide, John, and play.
Okay. So this is a very famous story. Someone gave me a question. How can we be consoled in our pastoral ministry if we're giving in? So this was a ministry of priests. And as you know, priests are very busy. And this one particular priest, it's in the story. If we are giving and serving our people as much as we can and still feel inadequate to do and say to them all we need, how can we be sure we are doing enough? Forgive me, we are never sure enough, but we trust in God. We must pray for them above all and speak to their hearts. And then here comes the part I want to tell you. I knew a priest who had 3 sons, and they were like angels, the 3 of them. And I said to them, Father, how did you manage to instruct them and that they are like angels? One received ordination even, and the other 2 are chanters in his parish. How did you manage to instruct them? And they are so devout and so beautiful in their manner. So they're asking this priest, how did you do it? You don't even have time for your family. You don't have time in your service, and your kids are all angels. He said to me, Father, I never taught them anything. But by infancy, I used to go and kneel by their bed for half an hour in the night and pray for them. And all the things I wanted to tell them, I told God, and God put in their hearts. It's nice, huh? So, this is what he did. He would kneel, he'd come home late at night from service, busy, and he would say, this is what I want to tell my kids. You tell them. Do we believe that? I think the same principle may apply for our parishioners. Let's speak to God for all the things that we want the parishioners to hear. And if we approach them with that prayer in our heart, surely their heart will be touched and be formed, so we can tell God first what we want to tell them. Pray and leave the matter to Him and do whatever we can. And that's the question, is do we trust God? And I think as parents, we don't. You know, like when one of your friends comes up to you and says, my kid's struggling, my kid's suffering, my kid's doing this or that, what do we say? Rabbeinu Ma'ak, pray, God will take care of everything, it's okay, we're full of good advice, huh? And then it's our kid. And now it's different, right? Now our kid is struggling. And now you're like, no, I'm going to do something about this. Why don't you pray? Save the prayer. It's my kid. We got to do something. I'm going to take him to a therapist. We're going to go do this. We're going to do that. I'm going to control this situation. Right? We're full of faith when it's other people's kids. We're not full of faith when it's our kids, because now it's real. Now it matters. Now it's my kid you're talking about. And so sometimes that relinquishment is what God is looking for. He wants to get you to a point where you say, that's your kid, it's not my kid. We have to all get to that point where you can look God in the eye and say, that's your kid. It's not my kid. You take care of him. Things for you to do. Objective. Are the kids in church or knowing Christ through the church? Bringing them to church isn't enough. Sticking them in the church and saying, just go to the meeting, go to this, go to that, it's not enough. Sometimes we use church as a way to take up time. If they're in church, they're not doing bad things outside. It doesn't work. They go to college, they got lots of time. Lots of time to do lots of things. And lots of opportunities to do lots of things. So you put them in church Monday night for this meeting, and Tuesday night for the hymn meeting, and Wednesday night for the Tezbehah, and Thursday night for the... And I kept them busy. Big deal. They're going to go to college, you're going to have all the time in the world, and all the opportunity in the world. And that's what happens, right? So it's not about time in church. It's about, do I know Christ or not? I'll tell you the story about Abu Namat al-Miskin, Father Matthew the Poor. A mom came up to him once and said, my daughter is a mess. This is in Egypt in the 60s. She sleeps around. She goes to clubs. She goes to nightclubs. She wears all kinds of makeup, and she wears scantily dressed things, and she comes home with guys, and she stays out till 2 a.m, and she dances, and she does this, and this. I need you to talk to her. I need you to help me. I need you to blah, blah, blah. So what did Abu Namat say? He said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Who's your confession father? And she says, well, I don't really have one. He goes, okay, you're going to get a confession father. And I want you every day to read the Bible for half an hour. And I want you to read this spiritual book. And I want you to devote yourself to prayer for these times. And I want you to focus on confession. And she said, no, Abuna, I'm talking about my daughter. I'm here for my daughter. My daughter is a tramp, right? And she dresses and she does and blah, blah, blah. He goes, I know, I heard you. So for your daughter, you're not allowed, you don't have hell to speak to her. You're not allowed to speak to her. And you have to do what I said. She's like, she's the one with the problem. Don't speak to her. And so for 6 months, this woman locked herself in her room from the times Abuna said. She would do her devotion, she would do her prayers, she would do her confession, she would read the Bible, and the daughter started to get curious. And the daughter would bang on the door, Mom, what are you doing in there? She goes, I'm not talking to you. Mom, come out, blah, blah, blah. She goes, the food's outside on the stove. And she kept at it, and the daughter slowly started to be affected. How did the story end? The daughter breaks down the mom's door while she's in her khilwa, in her quiet time, and she says, Mom, I want to be like you. And so Abuna Metta saw that the daughter's problems were whose problems? The mom's problems. He diagnosed it. So he said, let me tell you how to fix your daughter. You. This. And eventually the daughter came and succumbed. And when we look at Christ and the disciples, the biggest example, how much talking did he do to the disciples? Not much. What did he do? I mean, if you look at all of Jesus' talks, 3.5 years on earth, you take all of his talks in the Bible, how long? Like a week? All right, maybe. Let's multiply it by 52. Maybe there's stuff that wasn't written down. A year? Okay, so he talked for a year. What about the other 2.5 years? What did Jesus do other than talk? He hung out, they got Korean barbecue, tell jokes, fires, s'mores. What did he do? He discipled them. He was just with them. He made himself available to them. He didn't talk to them. His presence was enough. His calming spirit was enough. His commentary on whatever was enough. So this is how we teach kids. Don't talk at them. Disciple them. Just like Christ disciples us and he discipled his apostles. Be with them. Spend time. Interact. Focus. Be present. The phones, try to get rid of them when you're with the kids. Big problem, right? But allow them to see your spirit. Allow them to absorb from you what's in you. And they will. They have no choice. Next point. Abuna Dawood always used to say, التربية بتتشرب. Right? Parenting discipline is absorbed by the kids. You almost can't help it. They're going to be like you and take from you. So the only thing you can do is be a better you. Then the last thing I'll say is Sunday school. With all due respect to Sunday school, it's not very effective. I mean, I'm the Amil Khidma at our church, and I'll be the first to tell you. So, history of Sunday school, Pope Shenouda started Sunday school in the 50s. Why? Because there's no books, there's no education, no one knows anything. The priests don't know anything, right? So what they happened is they got a few books from the outside, they put them in a central location. All the servants would drive to Giza or Shobra or wherever, read the books, then drive out to different villages and teach what's in those books. Because there's ignorance everywhere. No one knows anything. Sunday school is a very good second-rate way to deliver content, right? And so you're trying to teach kids about the Athanasius and Noah's Ark and whatever. Blah, 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 right? Do we have that problem now? How many Bibles do all of you have at home? How many kids' Bibles do you have? I mean, we have the internet. There's no problem in content. We got lots of content. I don't need to go hear a second-rate lesson on St. Athanasius. I can Google him when I'm ready. And I'll Google and I'll get the best lesson I can ever desire. Right? We all know the story of Noah's Ark. Our kids know all the Bible stories. You guys read to your kids the Bible every night. Sunday school was great for the time when no one knew anything. But now, we all know stuff. And so don't depend on Sunday school. The problems of today's age isn't knowledge. It isn't that we don't have enough resources. We have too many resources. You want to YouTube Christian movies and videos? Your kid can be there for 7 months watching these things, right? We have enough resources. That's not the problem. The problem of today's age is loneliness, isolation, anxiety, depression, interaction with each other. This is today's problems. So sometimes we kind of throw the 1950 Egyptian problem solution at today's kids. Sit down, shut up, listen to St. Athanasius. It's like, you know what, that kid's depressed. That kid's on Prozac. That kid wants to commit suicide. And you're going to tell him about some guy from, and I'm not saying don't tell him about some guy, but we have to be thoughtful as to what our kids need. So my point to you is, Sunday school is half an hour long. It's once a week. It's not very effective. That's not going to educate your kids. That's not going to teach your kids anything. If you're depending on about Madars Ahad, forget about it. You want your kids to be Christians, you want them rooted, you root them. And you don't root them by talking at them. You root them by rooting yourself, and then they will be rooted. And if you depend on Sunday school to teach them all this stuff, you're going to be very sad in 10 years because they won't know anything. What they're going to learn from you. And what they're going to say because they heard you say it. And you have to be that model, the model of Christ and the disciples. You disciple them and be with them. You are more influential than you think. You think the phone is the most influential. It's not. You are still the most influential thing in their life. Don't depend on Sunday school or the hymn class. I take them 4 times a week, and I put them, and then I go to Starbucks, and what else do you want me to do? You can do more. Be more. Don't just take them and throw them in a class. In conclusion, maybe you should read I Was Selfish 2 kids ago. And now, this has brought me out of my selfishness. All right, that's all I have. Glory be to God forever, amen.